So welcome, welcome. And we're going to start with a big one, which is, what are the biggest needs in our region right now as you see them? She gets a big view into what's going on.
So I think, first of all, good morning, everyone. I'm just delighted to be here, and there were a couple of things. Before we got into the discussion, I just wanted to say to help frame our time together and ensure I didn't forget. And so the first thing that I want to say is there are so many needs in this region, and I'm going to name some. But for as many needs as there are so many resources, right? So many organizations, so many individuals, so many foundation arms of corporations. We have the money, right? It's here. So I wanted to say that, and then the second piece was for all of the nonprofit leaders in the room, one of the things that I think philanthropy in the region, but also nationally, needs to do better is engender a better sense of collaboration. People often talk about competition, but I feel like philanthropy doesn't take responsibility for how they set the tone for that. My experience as a nonprofit leader was that other nonprofit leaders were always willing to collaborate and figure out ways that we could work together. So there are plenty of needs, there are enough resources, and if we give nonprofit leaders an opportunity to work together, pool our internal resources, we can do even more good. So I just had to get that out. And in terms of the needs in the region, which I think probably everyone in this room will realize, they shift, right? Like what is trending and what people are focused on changes. I think currently, healthcare access, gaps in education, income inequality, underrepresentation in leadership, and folks who are unhoused, so housing insecurity. When I talked about issues shifting a decade ago, food insecurity was really top of mind for folks. It is still an issue, but not nearly as much of an issue as it was during the pandemic when I feel like it peaked, right? One of the things that I have seen hold strong in recent years is the system change work that a lot of foundations in particular are interested in funding. And the systems change work was born out of an understanding that so many of the different issues that I named are intersectional, right? My husband is he is a social worker by trade, but he took the policy track and housing was his thing. And when he gets up on his soapbox, he talks about how all roads lead to folks who are unhoused, but those roads intersect with education, they intersect with joblessness, they intersect with access to healthcare. All of those things work together. So if you try to solve one without looking at the other, and that the same goes for education, you try to look at one independently without taking a strong look at the other, or at least bringing those other issues into the conversation, then you're having a really myopic discussion, right? So there has been a lot of investment in systems change and in ensuring we're taking a more comprehensive view at all of these issues. And if you're a nonprofit leader in the room and you've appealed to a funder who has been funding you for some time, and then you have your site visit and they tell you that within the next year their giving priorities are going to change, raise your hand if that's ever happened to you, right? It is both maddening and it is part of what you accept when you step into those roles, that these issues shift and change.
Thank you for that. Let me ask this, because of those intersections and everything touches everything, how do you advise people who want to give to have the most impact for their money, because, you know, it's all hard-earned money that people are giving away. So how do they maximize impact when, you know, these things are siloed?
So here's something you probably don't hear much in these conversations, but self-reflection is really important. Like, what actually matters to you and your family? Because there are, like, I could have gone on. I just, you know, I cherry-picked 5 or 6 issues. What matters to you based on what you know and what you are seeing, right? So this region is, I'm so proud to be from this region, and one of the things that brought me back here from Southern California when I graduated from Occidental was I was spoiled by the industries that lead here, right? We are a very well-informed populace in this area. And so many different issues and policies are right at our fingertips. But if you happen to know folks who are giving to other organizations, I say, number one, you can always start there. After the self-reflection, like, what matters to you? Look around in your network. Who's giving? Where are they giving? One of the other things I wanted to say that I had to get out, no matter where we were in the discussion, was just the importance of giving locally. Because this is the nation's capital, there are lots of individual donors who look nationally when they give. One of my favorite people in DC, her name is Rachel Kronowitz, and when she gets up on her soapbox, she is a longtime supporter of the Women's Foundation, but we're also in the same LGW class. She says, for every national organization that you give to, you should give to at least 2 local organizations, right? So look inward, what matters to you, and hone in on that. Talk to folks in your network, see where they're giving. And then, you know, my husband also says facetiously, Google is free. Like, see what's happening locally, see who is, who's making waves, who within those areas that you've identified, and then stick with that organization. And you can be a monthly giver, you can be an annual giver, but help them, and I bet that the nonprofit leaders in the room will appreciate this, give them an opportunity to be able to project that Anne, that Susan, that Jenny, that Cathy are gonna be there for them the same time, same place next year. That matters. Whether you are giving $50 monthly, whether you're giving $5,000 annually, try your hardest to stay in the cut with that organization as long as you can.
I'm gonna chime in on this. We discussed this on the call because I get asked a lot, like, oh, how did you end up on these nonprofit boards? Like, people give and they don't really know how to take the next step from writing that kind of check. And so what I'll add to that is one of the biggest things that you can do is make a 3-year grant. I mean, you can do 2, you can do 5. I tend to do 3. But if you're giving $1,000 a year and you give 3, you say, I'll give you $3,000 for the next 3 years, and I think that nonprofit leaders will agree with this, you're really helping that organization in ways you don't know, because they gotta fill that bucket every year. And now, the next year, they're starting with $1,000 in the bucket that they can count on. Also, it puts you as a donor into the $3,000 bucket, or if you're giving $5,000 a year, you're listed in the program as a $15,000 donor instead of a $5,000 donor. So you both help the organization and you give yourself a little bit of limelight, so to speak. So when you hear these huge numbers, somebody gave $100 million to X, Jeff Bezos or Zuckerberg or whoever it is, that could be $5 million for 20 years, or it's usually, it'd be $10 million for 10 years. So they get that big burst of they gave $100 million, but it is this over time, but it really helps the organizations, and then they take note of you. And then that's how you end up doing more and they'll ask you to volunteer, to help, or, to do whatever. So to your point, I think giving regularly and giving multi-year grants is just crucial for organizations. One of the questions that I have for you is, for first-time donors, besides, multi-year gifts, how do they get noticed? How is it not you feel good when you write the check, but then a week later you don't feel so great, or forget about it?
So if we focus on folks who are at the stage in their life and their career where they can give sizable gifts, right, which we talked about, where they can.
You're saying everyone in this room is old?
No, that was the first part. The follow-up is going to be to talk about folks who are literally first-time donors. They're just at the stage in their lives where they're thinking about becoming philanthropic, so I'm going to get to those folks. But I'm going to start with the highly resourced donors, right? I would say if you are interested in doing more than writing a check, the first thing is consider joining a board. And that's easy to say, it's not always easy to do. And one of the things that you and I talked about, Cathy, is when you write the check, if you write a check of a certain size, and you follow up, or if the organization is doing what they should, they're going to follow up with you. You have an opportunity to say, ask, are you looking for board members? And something else I want to say is often nonprofit organizations have a board, and their primary function is to raise funds, but they also have a friend-raising entity, right? So when I ran the Posse Foundation here, we had a leadership council and we had a board. The function of the leadership council was to bring in more volunteers because so much of the work that our small team did required that. They also wrote checks, but they were smaller checks, and that was an on-ramp for some of them to the board. So you ask, do you have spaces on your board? I want to become a more comprehensive supporter. And bells will go off in the heads of nonprofit leaders when they hear that, right? That means you want to develop a more meaningful relationship with them. You can also watch what's happening in the Washingtonian magazine. Who's being featured and talked about, like who has events, both galas, luncheons, places that you can show up and get to know other folks on your board, because candidly, you might talk to some folks on a board and decide, that is actually not the place that I want to be. But you have conversations with other folks and their boards may be more actively engaged, because you got to decide the culture of the board that you want to join. And volunteering at various events like this one can also be an opportunity to learn more. But I would say at the stage that you have become a major donor, you have a network. So work your network and talk to folks who who have been on boards, go to events with them, actually going to the Impact100 Gala, which is on the, I'm gonna plug it, it's on the 5th of October, is that accurate?
The foundation.
Library Foundation. The Library Foundation, it's on the 5th of October, my apologies. You can go to those events and learn more about an organization just by standing in the room and listening. And
you can go to Tamara's event.
And I thank you so much, Jenny. Or you can come to our annual reception, which is taking place on October 17th. So there are various ways that you can get involved and get beyond writing a check. I will say, and maybe some of you would disagree with me, but if I pivot to folks who are emerging funders, right? They are maybe a couple of years out of graduate school and working many more hours than they should be at some law firm or consulting firm or some school, and they're trying to figure out how to become more involved. Getting involved at that stage in your career is, to me, easier because you're free labor. You can go to an organization like the Posse Foundation and you can be an interviewer of the students that we're bringing into the scholarship program. You you may have limited time, but you've got unlimited energy, and organizations are looking for that. And so the balance of the time that you're able to spend versus the amount that you're able to give, that balance shifts over time. The amount of organizations that I volunteered for when I was in my 20s and early 30s, there were so many, and it was so exciting and new. My ability to write checks as a graduate student was significantly lower than when I started. I finished my degree and got out of the world of politics because I actually, wanted to be able to contribute to my family. And my ability to spend the time dwindled, but my ability to write checks and join boards, right, that time widened for me. And for first-time donors, I will say this. Number one, any amount that you give, especially if you give consistently, will be greatly appreciated. Folks recognize that the $20 you're giving monthly, right, for the next 2 years, that is something that you are sacrificing, and it will be appreciated and it will be noted, and it's muscle memory development. So I started doing that in my late 20s, right? And that has evolved into me actually being able to, I almost start itching if I look up and I realize that my monthly giving has lapsed because I developed that muscle memory over time. And women are so incredibly actively involved in philanthropy. We power philanthropy. And we need women giving at every age and stage because we have reached a point in the region and in the country where folks need to recognize that more than they have been, and the issues that impact us most critically are not getting the amount of funding that they should. I don't blame that on us, though, on the women's giving community. I blame it on the larger philanthropic community. There's this stat that I've been sharing since I joined the Women's Foundation that less than 2% of all giving goes to organizations that are focused on women and girls. Less than 2%, that's in 2024. And so much, again, of the giving that is happening, we are driving, but we are a smaller percentage, right, of the resources that are available. So that should feel like a conviction to those who have amazing resources at their fingertips. And I think that's a quote, or that is a stat that I'd like everyone in this space to take with them, moving out of this breakfast today, because it is, it's criminal. And in this time and climate, we need as many resources pouring into girls and women of need as possible.
I'm going to chime in on two things there. One is for our family, since I was little and very, very little, we do all of our giving on Thanksgiving. It's a day of giving thanks. That's what it's about. So we have Thanksgiving dinner, we meet as a family, and we go through our philanthropic initiatives. I will tell you now, we do it on, starting like 40 years ago, we do it on the Friday, not the Thursday, because my mom would be like, the turkey! My dad would be like, the meeting's not over. But it is that we do it on that Friday, and we think about and we discuss as a family. My kids are 18 and 19. They come, it's in the living room. This isn't like in a boardroom. This is just us sitting in the living room, before you have the leftover turkey. And they get to hear, this is where we're giving, this is what we're doing. And when they're young, they don't see any of the numbers. We just print out a printout without, as if whatever, you understand. Little kids can't understand numbers. But they can understand numbers, but everything seems like, give that to me, I want to buy an Xbox. So I do recommend that people, like when you say give every year, you hear every year. I remember growing up, there were so many organizations that they were just, there's a lot of acronyms, a lot. And so, my parents would talk about all these different, LFP or this or that or, whatever these acronyms are, that you learn them, but you also learn about places. So that, and also you were talking about going to learn more at galas. People say to me, you go to a lot of galas. To me, it is work. That is where it's also my responsibility. If you give to an organization, it is your responsibility to go to the dinner, the breakfast, the gala. That's how you learn what they're doing. It's you learn where in that organization you want to give. And you also learn if that organization is going off track. Most nonprofits don't go off a cliff. And if they do, it doesn't necessarily mean you don't support them. Years ago, I hate to call them out, 1,000 years ago, the SPCA in our town, where I born in Washington, grew up. Now I feel bad. I grew up in Annapolis, but 1,000 years ago, the SPCA was like there were a whole bunch of arrests. They were terrible to animals. It was awful, and we were supporters of the SPCA. And so we had at the family meeting a discussion of, well, boy, this is awful. We can't support this awful organization. And then we were like, actually, now is when they need the support the most, because now the new people are coming in trying to fix it. They need money now more than before. It's rare any organization goes off a cliff. An organization might drift off of its mission. You pick that up at galas. But more importantly, I go to every gala, and for the people who run nonprofits, I listen for one word when I'm at a gala. I listen for the word need. When the executive director speaks, when the head of the board speaks, I listen to need. We need money for X. Because I want to give where they need the money the most. And so I do think of it not as this, there's a lot of times I don't want to dress up and go out and drink wine. It sounds great and fun, but in reality, I like to sit in my pajamas and watch Netflix. But it's my job. If I'm going to give, I've got to, so I'm going to add, I think that was a really important point. And I'm going to lead from that point to say, how do you think about unrestricted giving versus restricted giving?
So there are 3 or 4 trends that I think are excellent trends. One of them is the trend towards more unrestricted giving. So I'm going to name 2 or 3, and then I'm going to go back to unrestricted. So there is trust-based philanthropy, right? Which is a buzz phrase that you're going to continue to hear more of, which is really about entrusting the folks who you are serving to have greater agency and autonomy, and also the leadership of these organizations to have more agency and autonomy. There is, centering community voices, and there is capacity building, and there are equity and inclusion efforts, right? Those are all things that have been trending upward for, I'd say, the last 5 to 10 years. The unrestricted funding piece is so critically important because, and it took me a while as a new nonprofit leader years ago to understand this. Restricted funding, just cliff notes here, is funding that has to be used for a specific purpose, right? For a specific program. Unrestricted funding can be used to support programs, can be used to support operations, can be used to support anything on an organization's P&L. When organizations have the imbalance where the majority of their funding is restricted, that means that operationally they are severely limited. And I cannot stress enough that if given the opportunity, if you're looking at an organization's website and they provide the option for you to give where it's most needed, and that typically is going to lead to restricted funding, or there is a general operating bucket that you can give to, please, 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 please. If you are going to give to one, give to the unrestricted general operating bucket. If you have plentiful resources and want to do both, do both. But the amount of freedom and I wasn't being dramatic. I put my hand to my chest because I have a visceral response to hearing about either of those choices. And so as funders with resources, which means you have power, direct those resources and that power and transfer it to the leaders of these organizations who need flexibility. And that's the key piece about unrestricted funding, the flexibility that it provides a leader to have. And larger philanthropic entities, organizations are beginning to understand this more and more. Another trend is less arcane proposals. That is a rising trend where a foundation is asking you to submit a 10-page proposal for $5,000, right? The return on investment for an organization is, it's really low when you've got two of your team members expending all of this energy and spending all of this time for a proposal that could really be a page to convey what's needed. So if you are part of a small family foundation, take a look at the paces that you are putting the folks who are applying for funding through. It's something that we are constantly looking at as an intermediary at the Women's Foundation. How can we get the information we need to hold our grantees accountable without wasting their precious time? And are there mom and pop operations that we're funding, which we're proud that we do? Are there ways that we can be really innovative? And if it's a staff of two, we can ask them one question that they need to fill out answers for, but we can also get them on the phone and just interview them, right? And get what we need that way. So how can we, as donors, both as a part of institutions, smaller, larger, and individually, do what we can to make the work of these organizations easier? Because as I started off by saying, the needs are unbelievable. Yeah. And the fact that the nation's capital, bordered by really prosperous counties, has the rates of maternal deaths that it has such high rates of unhoused families, has such high rates of HIV still, has so all of those issues, right? The resources that we have that should be trickling down to help invest in and solve those issues. We need to empower the leaders of the organizations doing the work on the ground as much as humanly possible, and everyone in this room has a role to play in that.
I mean, I totally agree with you, and I would say don't call it unrestricted, just call it operational, because unrestricted sounds like people have to give to mush, and operational, I think people really understand that and also know the burden you put on. At Cornell in Maryland, every year they get thousands of, and this might sound harsh, but it's the truth, of I have $5,000, I want a scholarship for my dad, grandmother, father, mother, cousin, nephew, whatever it is. They can't manage a for $5,000 a scholarship in somebody's name. It's impossible. Like, I mean, they sort of say it, but where does it get printed and where does it go and all of this? Like, you can do that stuff if you have big money, create a scholarship or, you know, something in somebody's name, but you have to just, you know what's in your heart on why you're giving for something or, you know, that piece of it.
If you're giving a bequest, that's going to make folks at University of Maryland College Park or wherever your alma mater, they're going to sit up and listen to that, right? We've managed to talk about the whole spectrum of giving now, whether you're a brand new philanthropist, right? If you're 10 years old, putting money in the pot at church, you're actually giving, right?
Yeah, so let me say, a bequest, you could give money in someone's name, of course, they can handle that. When you want to set up a program in somebody's name, you can't handle that.
No.
So I'm separating the two. And
Yeah.
I would say, I think foundations put people through fill out this stuff.
Yeah.
The other reverse of that is, for small nonprofits, I don't think you impress foundations when you have fancy materials or you do a lot. Like, I want nonprofits spending their time doing helping teen pregnancy, helping library programs, so when I see a lot of fancy stuff, I think you spent your money on the wrong thing. Spend it on, you know, on what you're in business for. But let me say this, because here we have Impact, and I want to do a plug for the library, because in many ways is similar to you in Impact, because the Library Foundation, and if you don't know this, it's not about the library. They do a ton of programs that touch, as you were saying, they touch homelessness, they touch kids, banned books we were talking about, literacy, feeding, everything. So my question for you, because you impact library, when people give, they get more bang for their buck, right? Because it's pooled. So can you talk about that type of pooled giving?
Sure. So whether it is through Impact100, the Women's Foundation, when you give to essentially what are intermediaries, what you are doing is trusting the folks who are running the foundation, whether as volunteers or as staff, to direct the funds where the needs are greatest. They are doing the research for you. They are developing rapport with these smaller organizations for you. They have their ear to the ground. My colleague Sarah from the Women's Foundation, my Director of Communications, is here. Our two program officer colleagues, they are going to community meetings. They are meeting with young people. They know about an organization that has been struggling for the last couple of years, but because of our funding and the attention that we've given them, have been able to build out and do more. And so DAFs are great, but there is nothing like an organization, in this case of women, who can be your eyes and ears, who you can trust. You know that they've done the work, have done the research, have built the relationships. And so when you write your check, it is going to cover, in many cases, 2, 3, 4 different issue areas. What I would recommend is that you give directly to some organizations and that you also give to organizations that pool resources, whether that is a giving circle, whether it is a community foundation. Most of the people in this room, I will assume, have the ability to do a little bit of both, right? I said earlier, for every national organization you give to 2 locally. Why not start the practice of giving at least one of the donations that you give to Impact100 or to the Women's Foundation, or heck, to both, and then directly to another organization that is doing work that's close to your heart.
It's really hard to get the small organizations, and I would say everybody has time and room to give more. We're all very, very blessed. We've been given so much, as Jose says. What do you need the money for? Give it to people who really, really need it. We all, if you're sitting here and you made it downtown and you got an invite and you came here, you're starting very blessed. And it's hard to find little startups. I look at things sort of on two ends, and one is it's hard to find the little person that's just trying to get off the ground. You know, the small organization that's getting started. We have an insight into that at Washingtonian and through an organization, Fair Chance, that looks for, you know, kind of startup organizations so you can give through a fund because they can find them better. The library can find them better, you can find them, Impact, because it's a network, can find them. And then I also look at things the other way and say, boy, is it hard to be a nonprofit for 25 or 30 years. That is hard. And so if you've been around a long time, you're doing something right. Because you know what? You're not the new shiny penny anymore. And to do it, you know, year after year and deliver results. And if you screw up, you can trust that somebody's going to write about it, know about it. You can have bad hires, you know, and there's been organizations that have nicely turned around. But that's how I look at things a lot that way. If you can do this for 25 years, hats off to you. And if you're starting up, boy, you could use a little help because, you know, maybe you don't know QuickBooks and you don't know what is in what bucket and how to get a video made and all these like super hard things.
You don't have a director of communications, we do. So when you fund the Women's Foundation's general operating infrastructure, that means we're able to do many of the things for our small nonprofits that, you know, we fund. We're able to amplify them in a way that their team just can't do. And that's something that the Libraries Foundation can do, right? We've got resources that we turn over to the organizations that we are funding so they can do more and be seen by other people.
Yeah, it is very, very important. Tell me what the Birth to Boardroom initiative is.
So it is not so much an initiative as much as it is a narrative of our identity. The Women's Foundation has been around for 25 years. We have had 2 primary signature programs. I've been with the organization for about 15 or 16 months, and it occurred to me that we had an opportunity to tell an even better story about our giving. So I'm saying now, and have been for about the last 9 months, that we invest in women and girls of color through grant making and advocacy from birth to the boardroom. We are pushing into maternal health. We're going to be piloting funding in that area starting next year. And then we have our early care and education work, which we have been in for over 15 years now. And then we have our Young Women's Initiative, which focuses on participatory grant making. And then we have a new project that we launched last year, which focuses on sustaining Black women's leadership, right? And really buttressing the infrastructure for nonprofit leaders in the region. So we're covering all of that. We are not trying to boil the ocean, but we are hitting on growth and development and the needs for women and girls across those issues. And I'm really excited about what that means for the future of the foundation. Thank you for asking.
Well, where are you giving that's really inspiring you? So what are some, I mean, I know they're all your favorites.
Yes.
But if you had to pick 1 or 2 places where you're giving money that you find very inspiring.
So I want to end, thank you for that question. I want to end on a source of great joy. So our Rockstar initiative is one where we give micro grants to girls and young women ages 14 to 24 who come to us with community projects or entrepreneurial pursuits that they want to fund. And it is really about 2 things. Yes, the resources, which are typically about $2,000, are helpful to launch, but it's also about exposing them to what's possible super early. Like, you have this idea, you have this dream, come to us, we are going to fund it. And by the way, you're going to be selected by your peers. And when you get that funding, it is a source of validation. And we have seen These young women do everything from create healing circles for other young women who have experienced violence in their communities, to a young woman who has a business where she repurposes materials, including like jeans, and shows her peers how to sew them and how to make clothes. There are young people who have mental health initiatives that they are leaning into and building up. And so every year we have a cohort. We just launched our Prince George's County cohort this year, which I'm really excited about. And so we are sourcing joy and we are funding joy for a community that is typically, and this is girls of color in the region, typically at the top of all of the worst stats. And I love this program because it is about what is possible. It is about what they deserve, and it is about the abundant lives that we want them to get used to living. And our program officer, Chica, does a fantastic job of sticking with them, advising them, and helping them understand what it means to be a leader, certainly much earlier than I learned. So I'm really proud of that. And when you go to our website, you can look at our Young Women's Initiative and know that the Rockstar Fund is the gem of our funding there.
Awesome. I think we're gonna wrap it up.